Have you noticed that things happening in politics are rather exciting right now? I do believe that we are in a very fundamental turning point. Crisis, the word crisis it means turning point. I don't think I know how it's going to come out.
At some point, the cultural elites, they essentially decided there is no such thing as truth in the sense that we had understood.
Transcendent.
Eternal, transcendent truth does not exist.
The trouble with the progressives is that they claimed power to put everything right while abandoning the two standards that can establish what is right. One of them, nature, and the other, God. And therefore, if you get more power, and yet the only thing that remains to decide how to use it is will, it can become very dangerous.
It's my privilege to welcome Dr. Larry Arnn to Socrates in the City. Dr. Arnn, please join us out here. Welcome. Welcome to Kentucky. This is a great book. I'm a writer. I think ideas are very, very important. So this book is, it is important. It is, in fact, extremely important. I don't say that lightly. And happiest of all, it is gloriously written. As someone who prides himself on writing well, I have to say you have just done a spectacular job. The ideas in the book are too important not to be written about well. So thank you for doing that.
Okay.
And of course, I mean it. So it was a joy to read. Let's start with the most banal question, which I think has to be asked anyway. What led you to write this? And the subtext maybe is, how is it that someone hasn't written a book like this? Because these, to talk about seminal documents, it doesn't get more seminal than these two documents. What was it in your life that led you to say, I need to say what you say in the book?
Thank you. By the way, his book on Bonhoeffer is one of the great books of our time. So, first of all, every important thing we do in life, we do for love. And I happen to love those documents. But there is a problem in the scholarship. And the claim that reigns is that the Declaration of Independence, if people like that, they think the Constitution is a reaction against it. And that idea actually grew up in the Civil War and is resurrected in our time. In the Civil War, the idea was the Constitution, which protects the authority of states to arrange their domestic institutions, was well liked by Southerners who liked slavery. And they didn't like the Declaration of Independence. In modern times, the left, especially, and most scholarship these days you probably know is left, the left fancies the Declaration of Independence and doesn't like the Constitution. And so to the people who wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and there's heavy overlap in those two documents, and to the politics of Abraham Lincoln, a very great man, that's a strange idea that they were not be connected. And so what is the connection? And, there are scholarly arguments breaking out into the public prints where somebody will say it's a reaction. The Constitution is a reaction. There's a man named Joseph Ellis, and he's a famous historian, a widely selling historian. And he begins his book by saying that to the Declaration of Independence, government is an alien force. And then they think better of that and write the Constitution. That's how his book.
Okay, and just to translate, that's total nonsense. It's so funny to me because you're too generous to put it that way. I'm not. It's just rank nonsense, and it's astonishing that an historian of the caliber of Joseph Ellis could say something like that. You generously dissect the fallacy of that in this book, but I always want to start there with this with the idea with this idea of how extraordinary it is that we could have people of that caliber putting forth those ideas. Are you ever taken aback just by that? Because
Yeah. Well, so, first of all, everybody should read Aristotle. You've all read Aristotle, right?
which part of Aristotle?
Any part. But you should start with the Nicomachean Ethics. But if you read classic philosophy, which I've been privileged to do, you identify what makes a thing, right? Like this is a chair. And it is made of something. It has a material cause, and then it's somebody made it. That's its efficient cause, and it has a formal cause, shaped like a chair, and then it has a final cause, and that is it's for sitting in. And if it had just 3 legs, it wouldn't be very good. And so everything you learn to think. First of all, the United States of America, the Declaration of Independence is 250 years old next year. And it is surely one of the most consequential political documents in human history. And the United States of America is one of the most significant countries in human history, whether you like it or not, right? Now, the formal cause of the United States of America is the Constitution of the United States. That's what it looks like. That's how it works, right? And the final cause is stated in the Declaration of Independence. And so if you claim that there's a contradiction between those things, then you're claiming that the United States of America is not, in fact, a real thing. It's stupid, as you say. And so,
I would never stoop to use the word stupid, but I implied stupid. When you say that it's stupid, of course it's stupid. But what's interesting, it's also telling because it's schizophrenic and it's destructive. The idea that someone would think, and I want to get into this, the progressives and Wilson, but the idea that someone could plausibly believe that you could throw away our Constitution or rewrite or some lunatic pundit just a few weeks ago,
or divorce the two things,
or divorce them, which is the same thing. But it's one of the reasons your book is so important, to show the inescapable link between them. But I think it's fair to say that until I read your book, I assumed a link, but I did not understand the link. And so you do a great service. So let me ask you again, because I don't think you really said it, what led you to say, I have to write a book that shows the unavoidable link between these two seminal documents?
Well, first of all, if you're, a scholar or a disciplined and perceptive human being, which you all are, you wouldn't be here, by the way, if you weren't like that, then you try to understand things as they are. And that means you need to, if you're going to look at it, you need to understand it in its wholeness. What is it that makes it what it is? I happen to be married to an English woman. Like all good men, I weighed way above myself. But England is not the same thing as America. What distinguishes them, right? You want to know. Now, a second particular motive is Eric and I both have believed for some time, that the United States is in a crisis that's rather like the crises of the American Revolution and the Civil War, because it concerns those formal and final causes. What is the country for? How is it supposed to operate and be governed? And so, when you've got a thing like that, and you're a citizen, and you care about your country, then you want to try to sort that out. What is the root of the matter? And so that's what I tried to do. And here's a delicious little story. I have many mischievous colleagues at the college where I work. A lot of them have been there a long time. And so I wrote that book and published it, and one of my mischievous colleagues set up for me to debate Joseph Ellis. And
Is this colleague still working under you in Hillsdale?
he's in fact, I've worked with a guy now, came with me from Claremont. But Ellis agreed. And then he sent him the book. And I point out in the opening pages of the book that Ellis claims that the Declaration of Independence treats government as an alien force. That's what he says. Whereas I say, they claim that the king, one of his perfidies, is to refuse his assent to laws most wholesome and necessary to the public good. Government is not an alien force. It's wholesome and necessary. And the Declaration of Independence happens to be 1,320 words long. It's not very hard to find out what's in it. And so I point that out in the beginning of the book, if memory serves, and Mr. Ellis canceled his appearance when he got the book. And bless him, I think he meant well, but,
I think Hitler meant well.
I think he did. And the point is, why would somebody think that these, the most successful revolution in America, in world history, modern history for sure, is ours. And it took two things. Because, after they won the flippin' war, which they had no idea they could, then now they got to set up a government, and no one had ever set up a government like this before. Never happened, right? And their first effort was a failure. And they did it in the middle of the war. They just did it in the ordinary legislature. The thing wasn't great. And so they took 11 years to get it right. And that is the oldest surviving constitution in human history. None has ever lasted as long as ours has. So it's got to be a big thing, right? What habit of mind would make you divorce those things? And I think I know what it is. I think it's a movement. Why did John C. Calhoun call the Declaration of Independence a self-evident lie?
A self-evident lie.
Lie, right? Well, he thought slavery was good. Argued it out loud, explicitly, right? Declaration of Independence doesn't say that. So you can see why he didn't like it.
And this was what in the 1840s, the 1850s? Okay. I have to confess that I went to Yale University as an undergraduate and attended Calhoun College, named after John C. Calhoun. And when they recently changed the name, I sneered, as I normally do, at anything like that, because we're living in times where people change everything because they don't like things. But it seems to me that in the case of Calhoun, they were right to do it because of who he was. Well, we don't need to adjudicate that, but I'm saying that when you say in your book what he said, it is startling.
Yeah. Well, the reason not to do it is that Calhoun was important as part of our story, and part of Yale's story, right? And it's an easy call for me. Hillsdale College was founded by abolitionist preachers, right? And we had a big part in the Civil War. And so my statues are of Abe Lincoln and Fred Douglass, who were revered. Fred Douglass spoke on our campus twice. So I don't have that problem. If I did, what would I do? I wouldn't lightly decide to take it away. Because another thing is, history is a bunch of stuff that happened, right? Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle both right. They wrote a lot of the same things. This alone is denied even to God, to make what has been not to have been. And that means if John C. Calhoun had been revered on our campus, my first impulse would be to explain it. Because why do you put up a monument? So you can remember. And there are evil things to remember. You should remember them. And we're in the teaching business here tonight and all the time, right? All of us are. And the learning business. So your monuments should explain.
Well, just to get back to the idea that Calhoun, as a genuinely racist, pro-slavery figure, did not like the Constitution. Did like the Constitution, and we understand that. We disagree with him, but we understand it. What has it been in more recent years? We touched very recently on Joseph Ellis, but talk about the progressives and Wilson. When did the idea that we could plausibly get rid of the Constitution, at least pretty significantly, when did that idea come into being?
If you think about those two conceptions, formal and final causes. The form of a thing is what it looks like or how this is a chair. If it didn't have a back on it, if it only had 3 legs, it wouldn't be a good one. Well, what's the formal cause of America has been radically changed. And that what I'm about to say is not controversial. In 1930 or any year before that, the government was, as a percentage of the private sector, was 12%. That's 51%.
I'm sorry, say that again. I didn't get that.
39% of the gross domestic product of the nation has been moved from the private to the public sector. And that's sensitive in a nation that's supposed to be a liberal society in which we make our own way and control our government, right? And maybe they think it's a good idea. Maybe you think it's a good idea. That's fine. My point is only it's different. It's a big change, right? And so those people, the progressive left, beginning in about 1890, something like that, they began to make an assault upon the name of the Constitution, upon the Constitution. It's obsolete. It's a mechanism. We have to have an organic system. That's Woodrow Wilson. And so we have new purposes for the government. So they're changing the final cause too, but they reinterpret the words in the Declaration of Independence to mean something they didn't mean at the time. And then they denounced the Constitution as a reaction against this document, right? And so that's the politics of
but what is what's at the heart of it? In other words, in the book you talk a lot about, the genius of the founders to create. We've lost, most of us, the awe that we ought to have at what they did, at what they accomplished, to understand human nature, and then to say, okay, we're going to have these kinds of checks and balances, and it has worked. At some point, the folks you're talking about said, we don't like the way it's structured, and we want. I think you make the case that they're basically setting up a fourth branch of government.
Another change in the form is that we don't make our laws in the Congress anymore. And
so what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that in 1840 and 1940 and 2024, Congress passed between 150 and 300 laws, which is about what it does. It works about the same way it used to, right? Laborious, two houses, pass the bill, send it to the president, maybe he'll sign it. That process produces about the same quantity that it always produced. It ranged. Last year, I think that the number of pages that were added to the Federal Register were 85,000. And that means that those bills, those 150 to 300 bills, they might be 8,000 pages. And so 10 times as many was made in a bunch of agencies. And there's actually an academic dispute about how many they are. There's a sort of consensus that it's somewhere around 150. But people who study that in the academy where I work, some of them think it's 148, some of them think it's 156. Elon Musk was saying the other day he thinks it's 450. God knows how many there are. If you don't even know how many they are, how can you keep track of what they're doing? And my point again is that may be a good thing and it may be a bad thing. The thing to understand is it's a different thing. It works differently, you see. And then then you're asking me the question, why'd they do that? And the answer is, you have to understand the Declaration of Independence and see why they don't like it. But begin with the initial part. The Declaration of Independence comes in 3 parts, right? And the first part is the beautiful, universal, eternal, cosmic part. We should all memorize that. When in the course of human events, that means any time in human events, it becomes necessary for one people, that means any people, to dissolve the political bands that have connected them with another and assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. Now, those are eternal laws, right? And the curious thing about them is we don't make them. And that's any thinker after Socrates would understand the meaning of that expression. Thomas Aquinas writes, what do we mean by the expression natural law? He said, it is the rational creature's participation in God's governance of the universe. In other words, you can just see, right? You can see, in my family, we raise children and boxer dogs, and they're not the same kind of thing. Although for the first 2 years they live on the floor and eat each other's food, and then they change, right? And so one of the meanings of the Declaration of Independence that's very simple to understand is when it says all men are created equal, it means that the way you can govern any boxer dog is not the same as the way that any child must be governed, because they're a different kind of thing. That is what their equality is. Now, see, that is a glorious revolutionary fixity. You understand that the great revolution of the United States of America, the most successful in history, begins as an act of obedience. These are these laws. We are going to obey them. You see, and you, king, are not, and that's our dispute. That's how it's written. Well, along comes another movement, and comes to America from German historicism. The people who murdered Dietrich Bonhoeffer were followers of a form, the Nazi form, of a similar movement. And what is that idea? It's not necessarily virulent. Hitler is very virulent, and Marx is very virulent, and a murderer, both of them calling for murder anyway. But the idea is that we've come to understand that everything evolves, that we think differently because we're born here and now than we would if we're born somewhere else, earlier, later, different place. And so we're shaped by history, and history is now a process. So not the laws of nature and nature's God, not any time in the course of human events. Change. Change is vital. Change is decisive. And then in Hegel, because there's a philosophic problem in that, which I'll try to state quickly. If you think that your being, your thoughts, your mental outlook, everything is shaped by time and your circumstances in which you live, how can you have objective knowledge of that or anything else?
Yeah, that's at the heart of it, isn't it? And of course, I think of Darwin, but the point is that at some point, let's call them the cultural elites, decided, they didn't say as much, but they essentially decided there is no such thing as truth in the sense that we had understood.
Transcendent.
Eternal, transcendent truth does not exist. And so they put forward the idea that, on the bright side, truth is always evolving. They didn't actually necessarily, not all of them at least, claim there is no truth. They kind of dodged the question by saying it's evolving.
So there's one more step. Because, Friedrich Hegel is not stupid, to say the least that can be said. And he sees the problem. And here's how he solves it. he says that at the end of history, only then, it all becomes apparent. He's a very technical writer. Sometimes I threaten students, if they're naughty, to say, I'm going to make you read Hegel again. But he says, the owl of Minerva flies at dusk. So at the end, you can look back and see. And so the German historicists and the American progressives, they believe that this is a decisively opportune moment in human history when we can take control of everything because we're at the end of history. And they don't like the Constitution because it's in the way. Divides power, responsive to ordinary common sense of the people. And so they want to reform that. And they reinterpret the Declaration of Independence to empower that. And that's what we're living with today. That's, in my opinion, that's what the argument is about. I mean, have you noticed that things happening in politics are rather exciting right now? And I believe I do believe that we are in a very fundamental turning point. Crisis, the word crisis it means turning point. I don't think I know how it's going to come out. I do enjoy the fact that it's being taken on in the way it is. But I believe in American history. I believe the timing of the American Revolution and the timing of the Civil War. And I suspect all those things nearer are harder to see you can't see them as well. I believe that those things are timed by the fact that it just gets to a point where it can't go on and something's got to be done. That's why the revolution broke out when it did. That's why the Civil War broke out when it did. And they've been arguing about it for 30 years, the Civil War. But now, Americans, they're heading west. That's actually part of the timing of the American Revolution was that too, because the king tried to stop people going west because he was doing diplomacy with the Indians and the French. And the French, the French and the Spanish said men, missionaries, and soldiers. And all you got to do is work in a college for a while, and you'll figure out that a society only of men is a dysfunctional society. So the girls all know, and my wife knows. But the English said families, and they grew. They were called plantations. They planted something, and it grew. And they took up a lot of room. And that gave the English in their diplomacy a disadvantage with the natives. And so the king was trying to stop it. Well, what happened in 1854? People were going west. And the question is, can they take their slaves? And slavery was not the kind of thing where you could just pick up your slaves and go. You need a lot of help to keep them. Because, like in the Alabama Slave Code, which is in our Constitution reader at the college, you can read it there, every free white male was obliged, slaveholder or no, to ride posse one night a month looking for runaways. Because although they were apparently happy in their servitude, they did persist in trying to get away. So you got to have a comprehensive system of law to support it. And Stephen Douglas, in this, Lincoln Douglas debates, he came up with the idea, just let each locality decide. But that wouldn't work, because are you going to take them or not? And, before you've got a territory even, let alone a state. And so what they do is they start killing each other in Kansas and Nebraska, and then something's got to be done, right? Well, I think that's things like that are going on in politics today. And I think the choice is between that nexus between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, or a more progressive idea that you can't understand progressivism without talking about the word science. Science comes from a Latin word that just means to know. But today, mostly we mean by it technology. Technology comes from the Greek word techne, which translates well as art, as in artificial, anything we make, techne. So science has become a tool of making things, right? And solve problems. See, it's not, like Galileo and Newton. They're terribly like Thomas Aquinas and Martin Luther and Aristotle and Plato. They all had something in common. They thought the highest human experience was to behold a beautiful thing. A beautiful thing always has to be an eternal thing. The ultimate eternal thing is God. So beatitude is the Christian word for meeting God. And you get to look at him, because he's perfect, simply beautiful, eternal too, right? So the object of science in the ancient sense is to perceive and understand and behold things that last forever, especially high or ultimate things. The new idea of science is where are we making society? Harvard is fighting with Donald Trump right now, and our college doesn't have to take any money from the government, so I can tell you I'm very much in demand right now by the networks and stuff. How would Harvard make that work? But I always say, they got more money than we do. They probably could. But they're saying, if you don't give us a lot of money and let us run the place exactly the way we want, we won't cure cancer for you. The president, Garber of Harvard, said that specific thing yesterday, right? So in other words...
This was not President Gay, because then we would know she's plagiarizing that idea from somebody else. This is the new president whose plagiarism we haven't yet caught.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, to understand your country, it's, I've made the argument that it's just like understanding this chair. It's just like understanding anything you look at. Try to explain it. There is 4 things about it that if you can get them right, you will understand it. And to understand our country in its beginning, it's to put together those things. And the material cause of the United States of America is the land on which we live, right? And the people who live on it. A blessed land, right? They were very charmed by the land. George Washington named it the Continental Army in 1776, and no American representative crossed the continent and came back until 1806. He didn't live to see it. He never knew how big the continent was, but he was very taken with it. See, it's our land, and it's a new land. We get to start over. We bring European civilization to a new world, and understand that can't happen again. We got to start over, right? They regarded that as the last best hope of mankind on earth. So
who did?
Thomas Jefferson, and then later Abraham Lincoln. Hillsdale College.
No, I mean I know Lincoln said it, but you're saying that the founders themselves were thought of it that.
They thought this. First of all, it took 150 years after the first English settlers to get the country founded, and they didn't come with that idea. And they had 150 years to learn, and then beginning in 1763, they got into a conflict with Britain because Britain decided to govern us now. They spent a lot of money. They won their second big war with the French. We helped them. They helped us. And so now they're saying, heck, we got to get some dough out of these guys. But we had developed over 150 years the most elaborate and richest representative political institutions in human history, all over the seaboard where the colonists were. And so the king, he doesn't know anything about that. And his ministers, if it had been two particular guys who were great human beings, Burke and Pitt, were friends of the American Revolution, enemies of the French Revolution, because it wasn't good, they thought. But they were out of power. And so the king had Grenville and Townshend and a bunch of idiots. And, at one point they sent, because Benjamin Franklin was, the founders, by the way, are a very remarkable bunch of people. I mean, it's just, the collection of them is awesome. And then you get to study the individual ones and you go, wow, each one, and there's a bunch of them, see. Well, Franklin was, what do you put it? Not the word shifty. He was a very artful human being.
Cunning.
He was very flexible. You know, he cultivated a
Shrewd. Yeah.
he cultivated a reputation for down-home piety. He was a very artful. He was a great man, very great man. So at some point, they can't get on terms with the British, and so they send him over there because this is a guy who can make a deal. And he gets over there and he meets Grenville, and Grenville says, "You are the children, and we are the mother country, and you must do what we say." And Franklin writes back to the Continental Congress, "There's going to be a war."
Yeah.
So but the thing is, that took time to come to a head. And just think of the particular problem they had. It's exactly the problem of the Mayflower Compact, right? Because now there's a bunch of people on a ship, and they don't know, they're about to land. They don't know anything about the land. They think they'll all be dead soon, as many of them were. And so there's nobody in charge, right? The dukes and the earls are all still back in England. And so they write up a thing where everybody agreed, right? So that's how we invented our first representative institutions. And then the king is saying, you can't do that. And there begins a correspondence and a pamphlet war. You can tell that there's going to be fighting. The first fighting is April 19th, 250 years ago, next week, at Lexington Concord. Really great, wonderful story. And but you can tell in 1774, because in 1774, Thomas Jefferson started writing. And he had a gift, you know, he was very powerful. And so here's the beginning of the last paragraph of his 1774 thing, a summary view of the rights of British North America. He's concluding. It's a long thing. Let those flatter who fear, sire. It is not an American art.
Say that again, because it's hard to hear you.
Let those flatter who fear, sire. It is not an American art. Your ministers must realize that they are servants.
Yeah.
He writes after the strongest man on earth.
Yeah.
Now they're getting ready to start shooting each other. See?
Yeah.
But they have to. But remember, everything you do in your life, everything my grandchildren do in their lives, they're not like the dogs. They have to think up a reason because they have a choice. And so now, this is the source of our law, the sovereign of our nation, and we're going to tell him no. We need a principle according to which to do it. The laws of nature and of nature's God. A law that applies to the King of England and to us. See? And that was necessary. See? And remember, it requires their obedience. The revolutionaries, they too have to obey this, which is the reason the revolution was restrained.
They stumbled on something. I mean, it's fascinating. History is fascinating because you think, why didn't it happen before? Or why did it ever happen? But it happened 250 years ago, roughly, that a group of these geniuses stumble on these universal ideas. And they do. It's amazing, really, that circumstances lead them to stumble on universal truths and to create what we can describe as self-government, something that had never existed in the history of the world. And of course, many of us would assume that God's hand is in this. This is not just an interesting technological advance. It's the discovery of something eternal, or the discovery of a way that we can partake of the eternal in how we govern ourselves. It's such an amazing moment in history. And as I was reading your book, it struck me, I mean, it struck me before, but it struck me particularly in reading your book that it's hard for us who believe in nature's God and who revere these documents not to feel that God's hand is in them, because it's not a technological advance. There's something extraordinary. And the way that you link the two documents.
So God is named 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. And there's a theology and a political philosophy, and it's very systematic, by the way. It's 1,320 words. You should memorize it. It's really great. But he first appears as the maker of the laws of nature and nature's God. He's the legislature. He second appears as the creator. That's like a founder. Then he appears as divine providence. That's the executive branch. And then he appears as the supreme judge of the world. And the lesson is that only in the hands of God would you put all those powers together. You see? Now, so first of all, that's literally divine, right? And they looked to the heavens for the justification and for their protection. Divine providence for the rectitude of our intentions. See?
There's grand humility in that, we have to say.
It's lovely. It's very, and remember, the first line is simply universal. The last line is the most particular thing, because they're in a room about this size, and the room still exists. The Constitution of the United States was also written in that room, same room, right? And they're in there together, and they know that there are warrants out for their arrest. And if they're caught, they will be arrested by soldiers, not policemen, and they'll be taken to England, you see. And so at the end, we mutually pledge to each other. George Washington promises Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson promises, unto death, our fortunes, our lives, and our sacred honor. So this beautiful, eternal, cosmic thing comes to rest in the commitments of certain people who stake their lives on it. One of the Christian doctrines is God works through us, right? They're assuming that station, right? And so it is sublime. Now, the interesting thing about this connection thing, between the Declaration and the Constitution, is that, first of all, some of the same people wrote both. Several documents, the Virginia Declaration of Rights, the Massachusetts Bill of Rights, were written at about the same time. And those documents happen to do the work both of the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence, and they're in integrity. But then in the middle of the Declaration of Independence, because the first part's universal and the last part's particular and fierce, and in the middle, it's the bad stuff the king did. And he's a dirty dog. Let facts be, prudence and deed will dictate that governments long established will not be changed for light and transient causes. Then he says, but when a design I've paraphrased now, evinces a design to reduce us to absolute despotism, it is their right and it is their duty to throw off the government. And then, is this right? Let facts be submitted to a candid world. And then the list of the bad stuff the king did. That's in the middle. And what are the things? All you got to do is, it's like hold a mirror up to it. Because all that stuff that the king did that's wrong, those are things that are forbidden by the Constitution of the United States. He had interfered with the legislature. That's a violation of separation of powers. He had interfered with the courts. That's another. He had refused his assent to laws, most wholesome and necessary for the public good. In other words, government's not an alien force. He had interfered with elections which means he interfered with the consent of the government. And those things, put them all together, and they supply the structure of the Constitution of the United States. In other words, we're not going to do that. We're not going to set up a government where they can do that. They're going to behave differently, right? And that means that the Constitution of the United States is actually in the Declaration of Independence. And to see that, it helps if you, everybody should read Aristotle, please. Plato's good too. But what's cool about the classics is they're first, right? And that means this is one of the things you have to learn in life. And I happen to be in a very fortunate line of work because I get a bunch of 18 to 21-year-olds, and we get to beat the crap out of them, and we get to encourage them not to think about opinions about things. You should look at the thing. Your opinion about the thing should be governed by the thing. I had a kid once say to me, if I come to Hillsdale, will you respect my opinion? And I said, no, we don't give a crap about that. and everybody laughed at him. And I said, do you respect mine? And he said, yes. And I said, you don't know what it is. And so shouldn't you learn to see things as they are? And, to understand the magic and the unprecedented nature of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, you have to know something about other things like it, and then you can see how different they are. And
That's I want to ask the question, and it's a good place for me to ask it. What we're talking about when we talk about the Declaration and the Constitution ultimately is freedom, self-government on the founders' model, a unique thing in the history of the world, and a thing that has been challenged by progressives. They don't, as I think I said earlier, they don't really openly, explicitly say, we don't believe in truth or we don't believe in liberty, because that would be politically troubling maybe. So they
do say that sometimes.
Well, sometimes, but they are nonetheless, just as King George was doing, they're attacking these fundamental ideas, the idea that we can govern ourselves, the idea that there's this idea, a concept of liberty, of self-government. They are at war with that. And that, to me, is what's so astonishing, that when you talk about the progressives throughout the book, their war on these two documents, or on the ideas that are common to the documents, they're at war with America historic.
And remember, it's sort of one of the truths that I believe, and it's in the classics. It's in C.S. Lewis, too. He writes this very beautifully. There's never a sustained opinion that grows powerful that doesn't have some claim of a good behind it. And so what the progressives thought was, we've got modern science, we've learned so much, we can perfect the society. See, in other words, they hoped for better than has ever been known. They thought you could put it all right, you see. And it's our power that has grown that makes that possible. Now, there is a contradiction in it, but first, to understand the charm of that, like a very important progressive tract was a book by Upton Sinclair called The Jungle. Winston Churchill actually wrote a review of the book, from England. But what it describes is the meatpacking industry in Chicago and the squalor of the people who worked in it. And so there's a lot of sympathy for that. We got to fix that. People are being worked to death. Little kids are going to work in factories. And the thing is, so some of those things, by the way, didn't need to be fixed. Have been, some of them not yet. But here's the problem in the thing. Because remember, our challenge today, one of the reasons it's a good idea to read a lot of history is because history is complete. Whereas the stuff going on today is swirling around all over the place. And so you don't know, like I think, I have my political views and they're widely known. But, and, I know the president and have to do with him in various ways. And I think what he's trying to do is incredibly hard. And I hope he can do it. But he hasn't done it yet. And am I right about that? That's the kind of thing a person could make a mistake about. But I do believe that this is not a mistake. I believe that the trouble with the progressives is that they claimed power to put everything right while abandoning the two standards that can establish what is right. One of them, nature, and the other, God. And therefore, if you get more power, and yet the only thing that remains to decide how to use it is will, it can become very dangerous. And I think it has done. And so that's the thing, right? And the point, like I believe, I don't. If you study a lot in your life, and you have good teachers, which I have had, you learn to be careful about ascribing motives to people, because you can really only know what they are by what they say. And you compare what they say with what they do, and you try to study it up. And even what they say might not be true, and even they. So anyway, the point is, it's a little bit hard to say why did. But I'm about to proclaim why Joseph Ellis wrote that book. I think the reason is that he was in a world where the Constitution was out of fashion because it's clunky and methodical and counterpoise and balance and checks and balances. And we need to get on in life. We got to fix a bunch of stuff.
I'm sorry, who wrote the book?
Joseph Ellis, that guy.
Right, sure.
Something about that guy. And that guy's a famous historian, and he's still around. So if he wants to debate, I'm here. But in other words, I think Joseph Ellis, and I think Woodrow Wilson, I think, the main figures are, they're all in our Constitution reader at Hillsdale College, by the way. Write me and I'll send you a copy. Every kid at Hillsdale's got to read it all. The first phase of American history is the Revolution. And the second phase is the slavery crisis. And the third phase is the progressive era. And we're still in that, in its throes, I think. And there are other things that happen in American history, but those are the three big movements, in my opinion. And I think the third one's coming to a culmination, for good or ill, soon. I think we live in a house divided today. Cannot stand. Got to become one thing or the other. But I think that the energy behind progressivism is the wish to get everything out of the way that impedes our making everything better. And we've got new sources of power now, and we can do it. And I can make a direct comparison if you want me to. Well, let me do it. There's a man who's important in the progressives named James Landis. He's a lawyer close to Franklin Roosevelt. And he writes that in the new administrative state, which they, by the way, used to just proclaim out loud now, people are kind of shy talking about bureaucracy in the administrative state because it's rather unpopular. But they were just, in the new administrative state, you won't have to worry about separation of powers, because if people have tenure in the office and guaranteed salaries, they won't have any interest that violates the public interest. Now, see, isn't that funny now? But he wrote that in the 1930s as a powerful political argument. And people believed it. But you can, in the 51st Federalist, Federalist Papers, which in my opinion is the greatest of them, James Madison writes, what is government but the profoundest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be needed. If angels were to govern men, neither internal nor external controls on the government would be necessary. So just compare those two quotes. Which one seems true? And that's a direct. There's a difference there, right? And by the way, before you can decide which of two things you prefer, the first thing you have to do is distinguish them. And so that's why it's so important to understand. And then you can choose, right? And my own view is, I've been saying this for 25 years. The only thing that can save us now is the American people. And because if there are a lot of elite people, as I believe there are, who have been controlling things, then the solution just by logic would have to be in the people, ordinary people. That's why at Hillsdale College, it's very hard to get into Hillsdale College. It's very elite. It's very mean. We torture the hell out of the students. And it's just a few. And it has to be just a few. But we have 4.5 million online students, and we do that for free. It's, as I like to say, we charge tuition on the students, and we lose our shirts on it. We give away online courses and make a killing. Isn't that odd? Those of you who've taken this and send us some dough, thanks. But you don't have to send the dough if you don't want to. It's in the people, right? And under the principles of the Declaration of Independence, that's where the decision should be. They have a right. And so Churchill was a Democrat with a little d, right? He believed in the rule of the people. And he always said of America, you can trust them to do the right thing after they've tried everything else.
We're just about out of time. I don't want to let you go before I ask you to offer your views on the prospects before us. We are now, I always say, in the third existential crisis of our history. Sounds like you agree with me. It seems to me that over roughly the last century, the progressives have succeeded in undermining the founders' vision significantly and have created a ultimately tyrannous fourth branch of government, a branch of government that does not answer to we the people. What is your sense of our actually being able to take the country back and to bring us back to the principles with which we began in the two documents you write about in the book?
Well, I'm a citizen of the United States and a student of Winston Churchill for 50 years. Of course, we're going to win. But what you learn from him is it'll be hell. If you look at it more analytically, if not before, when the last trump sounded, the United States of America will fall. So we're not guaranteed an eternity on this earth. And no human thing has ever lasted in perpetuity. For it to die, though, we have to stop. Our loyalty to it must die. And so my own view, first of all, a teacher, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To a teacher, everything looks like a student, right? So I think that I think this is an absolute truth. And I'm shy about saying that. I don't think absolute truth is a thing you believe in because it's hard to find, right? You got to look for it. But I think this is one. I think after the birth of Jesus Christ, who's And again, I'm not, you don't have to be a Christian to see this. Jesus does two things that are staggeringly odd in combination. He claims to be the savior of every human being and the maker of every human being and everything and the only route to heaven. And then he says, my kingdom is not of this world. The first great prophet not to found a kingdom. He was actually one of the reasons he was killed. So a deduction follows from that. And the founders of America understood that deduction. That now you're going to still have to have governments, but they're not directly Christ's government. And therefore, freedom of religion is necessary. You see, you have to have that now because of Jesus. And any government that interferes with the service of any human who wants to give it to the eternal God, the creator of all, and the only road to salvation, it's rank injustice to interfere with that. That's why the first chief executive outside Israel to write a letter to some Jews addressing them as equal citizens is George Washington, President of the United States. He writes to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. I actually know the famous rabbi who runs that congregation today. It's moved to Manhattan. It is now no more, writes Washington to them, that we speak of religious toleration as if it were by the indulgence of some that others enjoy their inherent natural rights. We may congratulate ourselves upon a wider policy which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, made the children of the stock of Abraham no peace, each free to worship beneath his own vine and fig tree, there being none to make him afraid. Now, I think that is objectively true and objectively beautiful. And that is the claim of America. And if we believe that, we can save it.
Join me in promising yourself that you'll read this book, which is shorter than it looks and is, in case I didn't say, magnificent and extremely important, and also in thanking Dr. Larry Arnn for joining us this evening.
If you think these conversations are valuable, would you do us a favor and please like this video and subscribe to this channel? When you do that, you help us get these conversations out to a wider audience by telling YouTube that people are interested in this. Also, you can go to SocratesInTheCity.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you can check back every week. There's new stuff here every week. Thank you for tuning in.